The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot of Rosie's Diner, a small roadside restaurant that had seen better days. The faded red paint on the building's exterior told stories of countless storms weathered in years past. Inside, Maria Gonzalez wiped down the counter for the third time that morning, her movements automatic after 15 years of the same routine. At 38, Maria had worked at Rosie's since she was 23, fresh out of community college with dreams that had slowly been replaced by the steady rhythm of taking orders, serving coffee, and making ends meet. Her black hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her uniform, though clean and pressed, showed the wear of someone who took pride in her work despite the circumstances. The diner sat on Route 47, a stretch of highway that connected the small town of Millbrook to the larger city of Riverside, about 40 miles away. Most of their customers were truckers, traveling salespeople, or locals who came in for the daily specials and Maria's famous apple pie. The owner, Rosie Patterson, was a kind woman in her 60s who had inherited the diner from her father and struggled to keep it profitable in an age of fast food, chains, and online delivery. Maria lived alone in a small apartment above the local hardware store, just 3 blocks from the diner. She walked to work every morning at 5:30, rain or shine, to prep for the 6 o'clock opening. Her life was simple but fulfilling in its own way. She had her regular customers who knew her by name, her small garden behind her apartment building, and her weekend volunteer work at the local animal shelter. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday morning in late October when Maria first noticed the old man. She was refilling the coffee machine when she heard the bell above the door chime softly. Turning around, she saw a thin, elderly gentleman standing hesitantly in the doorway. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair that looked like it had been recently combed and clothes that, while clean, had seen much better days. His coat was too large for his frame, hanging loosely on his shoulders, and his shoes, though polished, had worn thin soles. What struck Maria most was his eyes. They held a quiet dignity mixed with something she recognized all too well from her own childhood: hunger. The old man shuffled to a corner booth, the one by the window that looked out onto the highway. He sat down carefully as if his joints ached and picked up the laminated menu with shaking hands. Maria approached with her usual warm smile and a pot of coffee. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "Coffee to start?" The man looked up at her with grateful eyes. "Yes, please. Just coffee." His voice was soft but cultured, with the hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. Maria poured the steaming coffee into the white ceramic mug and noticed how the man wrapped both hands around it, as if drawing warmth from more than just the liquid inside. She waited for him to order food, but he simply sat there, slowly sipping his coffee and staring out the window. "Our breakfast special today is 2 eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast for $6.95, Maria offered gently. The old man smiled sadly. "The coffee is perfect, thank you." Something in his tone told Maria everything she needed to know. She had grown up in a household where money was always tight, where her mother sometimes skipped meals to make sure Maria and her younger brother had enough to eat. She recognized the careful way he held himself, the pride that wouldn't allow him to admit he couldn't afford breakfast. Maria nodded and walked away, but her mind was already working. She went to the kitchen where Carlos, the cook, was preparing for the breakfast rush. Carlos was a large, friendly man who had worked at the diner almost as long as Maria had. His wife packed him enormous lunches and he often complained about eating too much. "Carlos," Maria said quietly, "make up a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. Light on the salt. For table 6? Carlos asked, referring to the old man's booth. "No, for me. I'm suddenly very hungry, but I think I'll be too busy to eat it all." Carlos looked at her with understanding eyes and nodded. He had seen Maria's generous heart many times over the years. Within 10 minutes, he had prepared a beautiful breakfast plate. Maria carried it to the counter near the old man's booth and sat down as if taking a break. She took a few bites, then stood up and stretched. "You know what?" she said to the old man. "I ordered this breakfast, but I'm just not as hungry as I thought. I hate to see food go to waste. Would you mind helping me out?" The old man looked up at her with surprise and something that might have been tears forming in his eyes. "I couldn't," he said softly. "Please," Maria insisted. "I feel terrible throwing away good food. Consider it a favor to me." After a moment's hesitation, the old man nodded slowly. Maria set the plate in front of him and refreshed his coffee. She watched from behind the counter as he ate slowly, savoring every bite with the appreciation of someone who truly understood the value of a good meal. When he finished, the old man left $1 tip on the table, probably more than he could afford. As he stood to leave, he stopped at the counter where Maria was wiping down menus. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of genuine gratitude. "Have a wonderful day," Maria replied warmly. After he left, Maria found herself thinking about the old man throughout the morning. There was something about his quiet dignity that reminded her of her own grandfather, who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. Her grandfather had often told her that kindness was the one currency that grew richer when spent freely. The next morning, the old man returned at exactly the same time. Again, he ordered only coffee. Again, Maria found herself with more breakfast than she could possibly eat. This time, she didn't even pretend to be surprised by her overambitious appetite. By the third day, it had become an unspoken routine. The old man would arrive, order coffee, and Maria would find creative ways to share her extra food with him. Sometimes she claimed the kitchen had made an error with an order. Other times she mentioned that a customer had left suddenly, abandoning a barely touched meal. The old man never asked for charity, and Maria never offered it directly. Instead, they had created a delicate dance of dignity that allowed both of them to maintain their pride while addressing a basic human need. As the weeks turned into months, Maria's morning routine with the old man became as natural as breathing. She learned to time her accidental extra orders perfectly with his arrival at 7:15 each morning. The other regular customers began to notice the elderly gentleman who sat quietly in the corner booth, always polite, always grateful for his single cup of coffee. Through casual conversation, Maria discovered that the man's name was Samuel, though he preferred to be called Sam. He had been a professor of literature at the state university before retiring, and despite his current circumstances, he still carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades sharing knowledge with eager minds. Sam never spoke about his personal situation, but Maria pieced together fragments of his story through careful observation and gentle conversation. He wore a thin gold wedding band that caught the morning light, though he always sat alone. Sometimes she noticed him reading paperback books that looked like they had been rescued from library donation boxes. His clothes, while always clean, rotated through the same few pieces week after week. One particularly cold morning in December, Sam arrived later than usual, and Maria noticed he was walking with a slight limp. His face was flushed, and he seemed more frail than she remembered. When she brought his coffee, she could see he was fighting off a cough. "Everything okay this morning, Sam?" Maria asked with genuine concern. Sam smiled weakly. "Just a bit under the weather. Nothing that good coffee can't help." Maria watched him carefully throughout the morning. He barely touched the breakfast she had accidentally ordered too much of, and she noticed his hands shaking more than usual as he lifted his coffee cup. When the morning rush died down, she sat across from him in the booth. "Sam, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have somewhere warm to stay? This cold snap has everyone worried." For the first time since she had known him, Sam's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I have arrangements," he said quietly, but Maria could see the uncertainty in his eyes. That evening, Maria couldn't stop thinking about Sam. She had grown attached to the quiet dignity with which he faced each day, and the thought of him struggling in the harsh winter weather kept her awake. She decided to take action, but she knew she had to be careful not to wound his pride. The next morning when Sam arrived, Maria had prepared something different. Instead of her usual extra breakfast, she had packed a paper bag with sandwiches, fruit, and thermos of hot soup. "Sam," she said as he prepared to leave, "I made way too much food for my lunch today. My neighbor gave me all these vegetables from her garden and I went overboard with the soup making. Would you mind taking some off my hands?" Sam looked at the bag, then at Maria's hopeful expression. "You're very kind, Maria, but—" "Please," Maria interrupted gently. "I'm trying to eat better, and having all this extra food around is just going to tempt me to overeat. You'd really be doing me a favor." Sam accepted the bag with the same grace he brought to everything else, understanding the game they were playing but appreciating the thought behind it. Over the following weeks, Maria learned more about Sam's background through their brief conversations. He had taught English literature for over 40 years, specializing in American poetry. He spoke lovingly of his students and the joy he found in watching young minds discover the power of language. He mentioned his late wife Eleanor only in passing, but Maria could see the deep love and loss in his eyes when her name came up. One morning, as Maria was preparing Sam's extra breakfast, Carlos pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Maria, you know I think what you're doing is beautiful," he said quietly. "But Rosie's been asking questions about the food costs. She's not angry, just wondering why we're going through so much more food lately." Maria felt her heart sink. She hadn't considered that her daily kindness might be affecting the diner's already tight budget. Rosie was struggling to keep the place afloat as it was, and Maria couldn't bear the thought of her generosity causing problems for her employer. "I'll talk to Rosie," Maria said. "Maybe I can pay for the extra food myself." Carlos shook his head. "You don't make enough for that, and we both know it. But maybe there's another way." That afternoon, during the slow period between lunch and dinner, Carlos approached Rosie with a proposition. He explained about Sam and Maria's daily routine, and suggested that perhaps they could create a pay-it-forward system where customers could buy meals for others in need. Rosie listened thoughtfully, then surprised them both with her response. "You know," she said, "my father started this diner during the Depression. He used to tell me about the men who would come by, too proud to ask for help but clearly in need. He'd always find a way to make sure they didn't leave hungry. He called it invisible charity, help that doesn't look like help." She looked around the diner with its worn booths and faded photographs of the town's history lining the walls. "Maybe it's time we brought back some of that old-fashioned kindness. Let's make it official. Anyone can buy a meal for someone else, no questions asked." Within a few days, Rosie had created a simple system. Customers could purchase meal tokens that would be kept in a jar behind the counter, available for anyone who needed them. The first person to buy tokens was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who came in for pie and coffee every Wednesday. "I remember what it was like during hard times," she told Maria, as she purchased 5 meal tokens. "Sometimes we all need a little help." The token jar began to fill slowly but steadily. Truckers would drop in a few dollars for tokens, families celebrating good news would buy extras, and even some of the high school kids would pool their allowance money to contribute. The beautiful thing was that no one needed to know who was using the tokens or why. Meanwhile, Sam continued his morning routine, unaware that his quiet presence had sparked something larger in the community. Maria still found ways to share her extra food with him, but now she had backup support from the growing token system. One morning, as Sam sat reading a worn copy of Robert Frost poems, Maria noticed a young man in his 20s enter the diner. He was dressed in a rumpled suit and kept checking his phone nervously. He sat down at the counter and ordered only coffee, but Maria recognized the same careful pride she had seen in Sam's eyes. Without hesitation, she approached him with the same warmth she showed all her customers. "Our breakfast special today comes with a great cup of coffee and a view of the sunrise," she said cheerfully. "First meal of the day is on the house for anyone new to town." The young man looked up with surprised gratitude. "I'm actually heading to a job interview in Riverside," he admitted. "I've been staying at the shelter trying to get back on my feet." Maria smiled and went to prepare another accidental extra breakfast, thinking about how kindness had a way of rippling outward like circles on a pond. Winter gradually gave way to spring, and Sam's morning visits continued like clockwork. Maria noticed subtle changes in him over the months. While he remained thin, he seemed steadier on his feet and his eyes had regained some of their sparkle. The daily nutrition from their carefully orchestrated meals had clearly made a difference, though neither of them ever acknowledged it directly. The token jar had become a beloved fixture at Rosie's diner, and word of the community's quiet generosity had spread throughout Millbrook. Local businesses began participating, with the hardware store owner dropping off work gloves for anyone who needed them, and the clothing shop donating warm jackets during the cold months. What had started as Maria's simple act of kindness had grown into something much larger. One morning in April, Sam arrived carrying a small wrapped package. He set it carefully on the table next to his coffee cup and seemed more nervous than usual. When Maria brought his coffee, he cleared his throat softly. "Maria, I hope you'll forgive an old man's presumption," he began, "but I wanted to give you something." He pushed the package toward her with trembling fingers. Maria unwrapped it carefully to find a slim volume of poetry, clearly old but lovingly maintained. The cover read Selected Poems of Maya Angelou, and when she opened it, she saw an inscription in Sam's careful handwriting. To Maria, who understands that kindness is the language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see. With gratitude, Samuel. Sam, this is beautiful, but I can't. Please, he interrupted gently. This book belonged to my wife, Eleanor. She was a teacher too, elementary school. She always said that the most important lessons happen outside the classroom, and that true education comes from watching how people treat one another. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes as she held the precious book. Thank you, Sam. This means more to me than you could possibly know. Sam smiled. And for the first time, Maria saw the teacher he had once been, the man who had inspired countless students with his passion for literature and life. As spring turned to summer, their routine continued, but Maria began to notice other changes in Sam. He started staying longer in the mornings, sometimes pulling out a notebook and writing intently. When she asked him about it, he explained that he was working on his memoirs. I realize I have stories that might be worth preserving, he told her. Not grand adventures, mind you, but small moments that meant something. The kind of everyday kindness that keeps the world turning. One particularly busy morning in June, a well-dressed woman in her 40s entered the diner and approached Maria at the counter. She had an air of importance about her with a pressed business suit and an expensive handbag. Excuse me, she said. I'm looking for someone, an elderly man named Samuel Morrison. I was told he might come here regularly. Maria felt a chill run through her. Sam had never mentioned his last name, and this woman's formal manner made her instinctively protective. May I ask why you're looking for him? The woman's expression softened slightly. I'm Jennifer Morrison, his daughter. I've been searching for him for months. Maria glanced towards Sam's usual booth, which was empty since he hadn't arrived yet. Her mind raced with questions and concerns. If Sam had family, why was he living in such difficult circumstances? Why had his daughter been searching for him? He usually comes in around 7:15 for coffee, Maria said carefully. But I should warn you, he values his privacy. Jennifer nodded understandingly. I know this might be awkward, but could I wait for him? I promise I just want to talk, Maria agreed, seating Jennifer at a table across the diner from Sam's usual booth. When 7:15 came and went without Sam's appearance, Maria began to worry. He had never been late in all the months she had known him. By 8 o'clock, Maria was genuinely concerned. She asked Rosie if she could take a short break and walked the 3 blocks to the local homeless shelter, where she suspected Sam might be staying. The director, a kind woman named Beth, confirmed her suspicions. Sam's been with us for about 8 months, Beth explained. He's one of our most respectful residents. Always keeps to himself, helps with the younger folks who come through. But Maria, he didn't come back last night, and that's not like him at all. Maria's concern deepened. She returned to the diner to find Jennifer Morrison still waiting, looking increasingly worried herself. He's never missed a morning, Maria told her. Something's not right. Jennifer's professional composure cracked slightly. My father has always been stubborn about accepting help. After my mother died 2 years ago, he insisted he could manage on his own. He was living in their house, the same one where I grew up, but the medical bills from Mom's cancer treatment had drained their savings. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. I live in Chicago now with my own family. I kept trying to help him, but he refused every offer. He said he wouldn't be a burden to anyone. One day I called and the phone had been disconnected. When I came to visit, the house was empty. The neighbors said he'd lost it to foreclosure and just disappeared. Maria listened with growing understanding. Sam's pride, his careful dignity, his reluctance to accept help, it all made sense now. He was a man who had spent his life taking care of others, and couldn't bear the thought of becoming dependent himself. I've been hiring private investigators, calling shelters, checking everywhere, Jennifer continued. All I wanted was to bring him home with me, to let him know that he's not a burden, he's my father and I love him. The 2 women decided to search together. They checked the library, where the librarian remembered Sam spending long hours reading. They visited the park where he sometimes sat feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs saved from his diner meals. They even checked the small clinic where he occasionally went for his medications. Finally, as afternoon faded into evening, they found him at the cemetery where Eleanor was buried. He was sitting on a small bench beside her headstone, holding the notebook he had been writing in. He looked up as they approached. and Maria saw a mixture of surprise, embarrassment, and resignation cross his face. "Hello, Jenny," he said quietly to his daughter, using what was clearly a childhood nickname. Jennifer rushed forward and embraced him, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I've been so worried about you. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you let me help?" Sam looked at Maria over his daughter's shoulder, his eyes full of apology. "I never wanted anyone to know," he said softly. "Especially not you, Maria. You've been so kind to me, and I didn't want you to see me as just another charity case." Maria knelt down beside the bench and took his weathered hand in hers. "Sam, you could never be a charity case to me. You're my friend, and friends help each other. That's what makes them friends." As the three of them sat together in the fading light, Maria realized that this was exactly what Sam had been writing about in his notebook. The small moments of human connection that give life meaning, the invisible threads of kindness that bind communities together, and the dignity that exists in both giving and receiving help when it's offered with love. The reunion between Sam and his daughter Jennifer was both heartwarming and heartbreaking to witness. As they sat in the cemetery where Eleanor rested, the full story of Sam's situation slowly unfolded. Maria listened with growing admiration for the man she had come to know, understanding now the depth of loss and pride that had shaped his recent choices. Jennifer explained through her tears how she had been calling and writing, trying to convince her father to move to Chicago, where she lived with her husband and 2 teenage children. "Dad, we have plenty of room. The kids would love to have their grandfather around. You could have your own space, your own books, your own routine." Sam shook his head sadly. "Jenny, you have your own life to live. I won't become a burden to you the way I became a burden to everyone else. The medical bills, the house, everything your mother and I worked for, it all disappeared. I failed her, and I won't fail you too." "You didn't fail anyone," Jennifer insisted fiercely. "You took care of Mom through 2 years of cancer treatments. You held her hand through every chemotherapy session, every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night. You gave her everything you had, including your financial security, because that's what love looks like." Maria watched this exchange with deep emotion, thinking about her own relationship with her parents and the sacrifices families make for one another. She could see where Sam had gotten his quiet strength and stubborn pride. "Sam," Maria said gently, "can I tell you something? These past 8 months you've given me something precious. You've reminded me why I love what I do. Every morning when you walk through that door, you make my day better. You've never been a burden. You've been a gift." Over the next few days, Jennifer stayed in Millbrook to spend time with her father and work on convincing him to come home with her. She took a room at the small bed and breakfast on Main Street and became a regular at Rosie's Diner, where she could spend hours talking with Sam in his familiar corner booth. During this time, Maria learned more about Sam's illustrious career. Jennifer showed her newspaper clippings and photos of award ceremonies where Sam had been recognized for his teaching excellence. She spoke about students who still wrote to him years after graduation, thanking him for inspiring their love of literature and learning. "He was department chair for 15 years, Jennifer told Maria proudly. "He helped develop the university's creative writing program and mentored dozens of graduate students who are now published authors and professors themselves. Dad always said that a teacher's true legacy isn't measured in academic papers or awards, but in the lives they touch and the minds they inspire." Meanwhile, the community of Millbrook was learning about Sam's background as well. When word spread that their quiet corner booth regular had been a distinguished professor, people began approaching him with newfound respect and curiosity. The librarian asked if he would consider leading a poetry discussion group. The high school principal inquired about guest lecturing opportunities. Sam seemed both pleased and overwhelmed by the attention. He had spent so many months feeling invisible, forgotten, and worthless that the community's recognition of his value came as a surprise. One afternoon, as Maria was serving lunch to Sam and Jennifer, Rosie approached their table with a proposal. "Sam, I hope you don't mind me interrupting," she began, "but I've been thinking. We get a lot of travelers through here, people passing through on their way to somewhere else. Some of them are students, some are writers, some are just folks who appreciate good conversation and wisdom. Would you consider doing a weekly storytelling evening here? Share some of your favorite poems or stories. I think people would really enjoy it." Sam looked surprised. "Rosie, that's very kind, but I'm not sure I'm the right person." "With respect, sir," Rosie interrupted gently, Maria has told me about the books you read, the way you talk about literature, the notebook you're always writing in. This town could use someone with your knowledge and experience. And honestly, it would be good for business too. Jennifer looked at her father encouragingly. Dad, you've always said that retirement didn't mean stopping teaching, just finding new students. That evening, Maria found Sam sitting alone in his booth long after the dinner crowd had left, staring out the window at the darkening sky. She refilled his coffee cup and sat across from him. Penny for your thoughts? She asked. Sam smiled at the familiar expression. I've been thinking about what you said at the cemetery, about friendship and helping each other. For so long I've been focused on not being a burden that I forgot what it means to contribute, to be useful. He gestured around the diner with its warm lighting and family photographs on the walls. This place, these people, they've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. They've given me purpose. Jenny wants me to come to Chicago, and I know she loves me. But here I feel like I have something to offer. Maria nodded thoughtfully. What if it didn't have to be one or the other? What if you could spend time with your family and still be part of this community? Over the following week, a plan began to take shape. Jennifer extended her stay in Millbrook and began working remotely from the diner, using the Wi-Fi and the quiet atmosphere to handle her consulting work. She watched her father come alive as he prepared for his first storytelling evening, selecting poems and stories that had meant something to him over the years. The first evening with Sam was held on a Thursday night in late June. Maria had strung some lights around the diner and arranged the table so everyone could see the corner where Sam sat with his books and notebooks. About 20 people showed up, some regular customers, some curious townspeople, and a few college students who had driven over from the university. Sam began nervously, his hands shaking slightly as he opened a worn copy of Robert Frost's poems. But as he started reading The Road Not Taken, his voice grew stronger and more confident. He didn't just read the words, he brought them to life, explaining the context, sharing the emotions behind the poetry, making connections between the literature and the everyday experiences of his listeners. After the poetry reading, Sam began telling stories about his teaching days, about students who had overcome obstacles to achieve their dreams, about the power of education to transform lives. He spoke about his wife Eleanor, and how she had taught him that the most important lessons often happen outside the classroom. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, many stopped to thank Sam personally. A teenage girl shyly asked if he had any book recommendations for someone interested in becoming a writer. A middle-aged trucker mentioned that he had never understood poetry before, but found himself moved by Sam's reading. Maria watched from behind the counter as her friend was surrounded by grateful listeners, and she felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her simple act of sharing breakfast had led to this moment of connection and community. As summer progressed, Sam's weekly storytelling evenings at Rosie's Diner became the highlight of many people's weeks. Word spread beyond Millbrook, and visitors began arriving from neighboring towns to hear the retired professor who had transformed a small roadside diner into an unlikely cultural center. Jennifer had decided to extend her stay indefinitely, working remotely while spending precious time with her father. She rented a small house just outside town and began integrating herself into the Millbrook community. Maria watched their relationship heal and strengthen as Jennifer learned to appreciate her father's independence, while Sam learned to accept his daughter's love and support. One evening after a particularly successful storytelling session, Sam approached Maria with an unusual request. Maria, I've been working on something and I'd like your opinion, he said, pulling out his now familiar notebook. I've been writing about kindness, not the grand gestures that make headlines, but the small daily acts that actually keep the world turning. I'd like to read you something. He opened to a page marked with a faded bookmark and began to read. There is a waitress who believes she orders too much breakfast every morning. She doesn't know that her accident has become the most important meal of an old man's day. She doesn't know that her simple generosity has reminded him that he still has value, that he still belongs somewhere in this world. She practices a kind of invisible charity that preserves dignity while meeting need, and in doing so, she has saved more than just a hungry man. She has saved his soul. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes. Sam, that's beautiful. Is that really how you see what happened? It's exactly what happened, Sam replied firmly. You gave me more than food, Maria. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Through the diner's windows, they could see 4 large black SUVs arranging themselves around the building. The vehicles had tinted windows and government license plates, creating an imposing and somewhat mysterious presence. Maria felt her heart skip a beat. In a small town like Millbrook, the arrival of 4 official-looking SUVs could only mean serious business. Her first thought was that there had been some kind of accident or emergency, but the vehicles weren't ambulances or fire trucks. The other customers in the diner, about a dozen people who had stayed after the storytelling session, began murmuring nervously among themselves. Jennifer looked concerned as she moved closer to her father, and even Sam appeared puzzled by the unusual arrival. The front door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. He was followed by a woman in similar attire, both carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. They looked around the diner with professional assessment before the man approached the counter where Maria stood. "Good evening," the man said politely, showing a badge. "I'm Agent Martinez with the Treasury Department, and this is Agent Chen. We're looking for Samuel Morrison." Maria's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "What do you want with Sam?" Agent Martinez smiled reassuringly. "Nothing to worry about, ma'am. We just need to speak with Mr. Morrison about a matter that's recently come to our attention." Sam stood up slowly from his booth, his face pale but composed. "I'm Samuel Morrison. What can I help you with?" Agent Chen stepped forward with a briefcase. "Professor Morrison, we've been looking for you for quite some time. There's been a significant development regarding your financial situation that we need to discuss with you." The diner fell completely silent except for the soft hum of the coffee machine and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Maria moved closer to Sam, ready to stand beside her friend regardless of what was happening. "Sir," Agent Martinez continued, "are you aware that your wife, Eleanor Morrison, was named as a beneficiary in several insurance policies and retirement accounts that you may not have known about?" Sam looked confused. "I don't understand. Eleanor and I went through all of our financial documents during her illness. We used everything we had for her medical treatments." Agent Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Professor Morrison, your wife was apparently quite modest about some investments and policies she had maintained separately. Over the past 18 months, our office has been trying to locate you to inform you of significant funds that are legally yours." Jennifer gasped and moved to her father's side. "Dad, what are they talking about?" "Mrs. Morrison had a life insurance policy through the teachers' union that she apparently never mentioned," Agent Martinez explained. "She also had a small inheritance from a great-aunt that she invested in what turned out to be very successful technology stocks. Additionally, there are retirement funds from her teaching years that were somehow missed during your financial planning." Sam sat down heavily in his booth, looking stunned. "How much are we talking about?" Agent Chen consulted her documents. "Professor Morrison, the total amount comes to approximately $847,000. The silence that followed was so complete that Maria could hear her own heartbeat. Nearly $1 million. Enough to transform Sam's life, enough to give him security and options he hadn't had in years. "There's more," Agent Martinez added gently. "The house you lost to foreclosure. It's been sitting empty because the bank has been trying to locate you regarding some irregularities in the foreclosure process. It appears there were errors made, and you may have legal grounds to reclaim the property." The atmosphere in Rosie's diner remained electric with shock and disbelief as Agent Chen continued explaining the complex legal situation surrounding Sam's foreclosed home. The other customers sat in stunned silence, witnessing what felt like a scene from a movie, rather than real life in their small town. "The foreclosure company has been under federal investigation for fraudulent practices," Agent Martinez explained. "They were rushing through foreclosures without proper documentation and failing to notify homeowners of their rights. Your case was flagged as one where the proper legal procedures weren't followed." Sam looked overwhelmed, his hands trembling as he tried to process this life-changing information. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face as she held her father's arm, and Maria found herself gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. "I don't understand," Sam said quietly. Eleanor never mentioned any separate policies or investments. We were always so careful about our finances, especially during her illness. Agent Chen smiled sympathetically. Professor Morrison, teachers of your wife's generation were often very modest about money, especially money they hadn't earned through their primary jobs. We found a letter among the insurance documents that she wrote to the company. She apparently wanted these funds to remain secret, so that you would never feel obligated to use them for her medical treatments. She intended them to be your security after she was gone. This revelation broke something open in Sam. The man who had maintained his dignity through months of hardship finally allowed himself to cry. For his beloved Eleanor's thoughtfulness, for the unnecessary suffering he had endured, and for the overwhelming relief of suddenly having options again. The agents spent the next hour explaining the legal processes involved in claiming the funds and potentially reclaiming his house. They assured him that their office would handle all the paperwork and that he could have access to the money within a few weeks. As the government vehicles finally departed, leaving the diner buzzing with excitement and amazement, Sam sat quietly with Maria, Jennifer, and the remaining customers who had become impromptu witnesses to this extraordinary turn of events. $847,000, Jennifer kept repeating in wonder. Dad, you could buy a house anywhere you want. You could travel, you could do anything. But Sam was looking at Maria with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of gratitude, determination, and something that might have been mischief. Maria, he said slowly, do you remember what you told me about friendship? About how friends help each other? Maria nodded, uncertain where this was leading. Well, I've been thinking about what I want to do with this unexpected gift, and I have some ideas. But first, I need to ask you something important. He paused, looking around the diner that had become his sanctuary. Would you consider becoming my business partner? What do you mean? Maria asked, confused. Sam's eyes began to sparkle with excitement. Rosie's been talking about wanting to retire, maybe selling this place. What if we bought it together? You know everything about running a diner, and I know something about bringing people together around stories and ideas. We could expand the storytelling evenings, maybe add poetry workshops, book clubs, community events. We could make this place a real cultural center for the region. Rosie, who had been listening from behind the counter, approached their table with tears in her eyes.
Sam, are you serious?
Because I've been worried sick about what would happen to this place and to Maria when I retire. I'm completely serious, Sam replied. Maria, you've spent years taking care of everyone else. Let me invest in your dreams for once. Maria felt overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer, but also by the possibilities it represented. Sam, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but nothing. Sam interrupted gently. You saved my life when you decided to order too much breakfast every morning. You gave me dignity when I had forgotten what it felt like. You helped me remember that I still had something to contribute to the world. Now let me return the favor. Over the following weeks, as Sam's financial situation was resolved and the legal paperwork progressed, the plans for transforming Rosie's diner began to take shape. Sam would provide the funding, Maria would manage the day-to-day operations, and together they would expand the business to include evening events, catering services, and community programming. Jennifer decided to relocate her consulting business permanently to Millbrook, buying a house near the diner where she could be close to her father while maintaining her career. The thought of Sam having both financial security and family nearby filled Maria with joy. The token jar that had started as a way to help Sam and other community members in need evolved into a formal foundation. Sam insisted on using a portion of his inheritance to establish an endowment that would ensure no one in Millbrook would ever go hungry. They called it the Eleanor Morrison Foundation for Everyday Kindness. 6 months later, on a crisp morning in early spring, Maria arrived at what was now called Rosie's Diner and Community Center to find Sam already there, setting up chairs for a morning poetry workshop. The renovated space included the original diner counter and booths, but also featured a small stage area, bookshelves lined with donated volumes, and community bulletin boards covered with local announcements and opportunities. You're early this morning, Maria called out cheerfully as she began preparing for the breakfast rush. Sam looked up from arranging chairs with a smile that had become familiar over the months, the expression of a man who had found his purpose again. Actually, I'm right on time. I've been thinking about what Eleanor used to say about the most important lessons happening outside the classroom. I think she would have loved what we've built here." As the morning progressed, the usual mixture of truckers, locals, and travelers filled the diner, but now they were joined by students from the university, retirees interested in the book club, and families who had heard about the weekly storytelling sessions. The sound of conversations about literature, mixed with discussions of daily specials and local news, creating exactly the kind of community atmosphere Sam and Maria had envisioned. Around 7:15, Maria noticed a young woman sitting alone in a corner booth, nervously clutching a coffee cup and glancing repeatedly at the menu, with the same careful consideration she had once seen in Sam's eyes. Without hesitation, Maria approached with a warm smile and a pot of coffee. "Our breakfast special today is really something special," Maria said cheerfully. "And you know what? I have a feeling I'm going to accidentally order way too much food this morning. I hate to see good food go to waste." The young woman looked up with surprise and gratitude, and Maria saw in her eyes the same mixture of pride and need that had first drawn her to Sam. As she walked back to place another accidental order with Carlos in the kitchen, Maria smiled to herself, thinking about how kindness had a way of coming full circle. Sam, observing this interaction from his table where he was reviewing notes for the morning's poetry discussion, caught Maria's eye and nodded approvingly. They had learned together that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or property deeds, but in the connections forged between people, the dignity preserved through thoughtful generosity, and the communities built one small act of kindness at a time. The story that had begun with a waitress who believed she ordered too much, breakfast had grown into something much larger. Testament to the power of compassion, the importance of community, and the extraordinary things that could happen when people chose to see and respond to the needs of those around them. In the end, both Maria and Sam had discovered that the most valuable investments were the ones made in human kindness.